Could AMD actually reintroduce the Ryzen 5800 X3D or potentially a Ryzen 5850 X3D in the near future to help with RAM prices? Welcome back to PC Builder. I'm Jason. This is our January 2026 Q&A, and we've got tons of great questions, including DLSS 4.5. Is it the real deal or is it kind of a step backwards? We'll also talk about the RAM crisis, PC parts prices, and more. If you get value out of this video, please give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe for more cool PC content. Let's jump into it. This video is sponsored by Meter, the company building networks that work for business. Is your business struggling with networking? Unable to scale and manage for your needs? You should check out Meter. Meter builds out full stack networking solutions that actually work for business. That's because they manage every aspect. Meter designs the hardware, they write the firmware, and they build the software. So it all works together. And Meter's networking solutions are built to give you maximum control with deep visibility, policy level control, and ongoing support. And all at a price that works for your business. If you're ready to offload your networking headaches to a trusted partner, go to meter.com/PCBuilder to book a demo now, or click the link in the video description. All right, IVN Roker wants to know, what are my AM4 options for 2026? And of course, Phantom Diamond, what's the best AM4 non-X3D CPU in today's market? Let's talk about AM4 options right now. I know people looking at RAM prices right now. Oh my gosh, Jason, DDR5 seems so crazy. If only we could use DDR4, because the price, well, it's gone up, hasn't gone up anywhere near as much in terms of raw dollars as DDR5. In fact, DDR4 pricing has basically gone back to like 2019 levels, where for $100 and something, you're going to get a 16 gigabyte kit. And then for $200 basically, or even a little bit less than that, you're going to get a 32 gigabyte kit of DDR4. That's kind of what pricing was 5 or 6 years ago. Of course, we expect as technology goes, the older stuff should get cheaper. It shouldn't stay the same price, right? So it is a little shocking to folks. But let's talk about what I think a lot of people want to get super excited about, which is, could we bring back the Ryzen 5800 X3D? Because we just got back from CES and we talked to AMD, and everybody seemed to want to talk about not the 9850 X3D, which is the new AM5 CPU that's coming. Everyone wanted to talk about bringing back the Ryzen 5800 X3D, possibly even an upscaled version of it, a 5850 X3D. Could you imagine that? I mean, that's what we got to talking about, obviously, because 9850 X3D is coming up. Could we do a 5850 X3D? And I just wanted to go through some of the numbers right now and just kind of take a look at what might that even be? And then, is that actually realistic? So about a week ago, TechSpot, aka Hardware Unboxed, they went ahead and re-benchmarked both the 5800 X3D and the 5700 X3D at 1080p with an RTX 5090 at both medium and ultra settings, and they compared it to a range of CPUs that you could buy right now. If you're thinking about building a gaming PC, a lot of people, well, you can't use a DDR4 system because it's obsolete. Well, is it obsolete? I mean, it's the same speed as the 9600X or the Core Ultra 9 285K. In fact, the only CPU that really rivals it is the 9800 X3D, which is not going to surprise anybody. Probably the 7800 X3D, obviously they didn't test that. And if you turn this up to 1440p, those margins, as small as they are basically, or kind of almost non-existent, would completely shrink up. And you probably would even see the same performance from the 5700 X3D as you do with the 5800 X3D. As it is, they're so close right now, you really can't tell the difference between the two if you were just gaming. So would a 5850 X3D even make sense? Let's look at the Tech Power Up CPU database here. This is for the 5800 X3D, but I really want to start with the 5800X. That's the base CPU, right? The 5800X has a base frequency of 3.8 gigahertz and a boost frequency of 4.7 gigahertz. But if we look at the 5800 X3D, it's lower. It's 200 megahertz higher on the boost clock and 400 megahertz lower on the base frequency, the base clock. Why is that? It's because of the X3D, it's the 3D V-cache basically, it's on top. So they had to lower the frequency on this in order to allow it to be cooled, because it's on the top. It's the original 3D V-cache that goes on the top of the CPU. Now the 9800 X3D, the 9000 X3D CPUs have it on the bottom, which allows for a better thermal solution. But there is another CPU out there, that's the 5800 XT, and it basically just adds another 100 megahertz to the 5800X. So it does seem like maybe, possibly, they could go up a little bit on the frequency of the 5800 X3D. But would it even matter? Because if you look at the 5700 X3D, this is going to shock you. 3 gigahertz base, 4.1 gigahertz boost. That is a massive drop from the 5800 X3D. It's 400 megahertz on the base frequency, and it's 400 megahertz on the boost frequency. And yet it is right there neck and neck with the 5800 X3D in all the benchmarks that we're looking at, which is totally crazy. So would a CPU like a 5850 X3D, or even just bring back the original 5800 X3D, make sense? Well, when we were talking to AMD at CES, they were joking, but maybe not entirely joking. Internally, if they relaunched the 5800 X3D, it would probably be the biggest CPU launch since, you guessed it, the 5800 X3D the first time. So it just seems to make a lot of sense to bring the CPU back as long as there's DDR4 RAM availability. And that is the big question right now in terms of DDR4 RAM availability, because a number of RAM makers were supposed to stop making DDR4 this year and switch over to more advanced processes. Some of those RAM makers were then going to potentially sell off their DDR4 equipment to Chinese vendors. There was a whole thing where the US was trying to, where they were trying to get US approval in order to send the DDR4 RAM manufacturing equipment there. So it's kind of a big question mark. But of course, DDR4 RAM prices have shot way up. So all of a sudden that DDR4 looks a lot more attractive to keep pumping out right now at the prices that they can get for it, especially the lower costs that they have than like HBM memory. So this is something that AMD told us that they were taking a look at, was what DDR4 RAM availability is going to be out there. I know what they don't want to do. They don't want to manufacture a bunch of CPUs, put them in the market, and all of a sudden nobody can get DDR4. And then they're like, they've manufactured a whole bunch of stuff. But here's the major rub on all of this. TSMC, where the Ryzen 5000 CPUs, including the X3D CPUs, are manufactured on the TSMC, I believe it's the N6 node. It's basically a 7nm process. They're basically saying that they are falling massively short right now in terms of production capability and basically wafer supply in order to pump out, you guessed it, AI garbage. AI garbage, that is what they're manufacturing. Of course, those AI companies are paying top dollar for all of this right now. Now, they define the advanced nodes down here somewhere in the article, basically saying that it goes all the way down to the 7nm process right here, the 7nm process and below. Unfortunately, 7nm process is the process that they use to manufacture Ryzen 5800 X3D and other 5000 series CPUs. Not to say that they won't continue to at least have some, and I will say, it seems like most of that is on the more advanced processes like 2nm, so maybe 7nm isn't as bad as all that. Potentially AMD could buy additional capacity 7nm. This is what they would have to do in order to actually manufacture these CPUs in large enough numbers to kind of meet demand. Now, of course, there is another X3D CPU that they could continue to manufacture and even bring to a global market. That is the Ryzen 5500 X3D. Now, a lot of people aren't familiar with the CPU because it's only been launched in Latin America. It was essentially to help shore up Latin American gamers out there. Hopefully there's extra of these things basically. Well, then how does it perform in terms of benchmarks? Well, Gamers Nexus did get their hands on one. They had somebody ship it to them and they actually benchmarked it. And here's one of the benchmarks. This is for Baldur's Gate 1080p. I believe this is with this is actually an RTX 4090. Not a 5090, but you'll get the idea. It's kind of right here in the middle of the pack, kind of hard to find. It basically performs similar to the Core Ultra 7 265K or an i7 12700K, Ryzen 9900X, 9700X, very similar to all those CPUs. Now, the 5800 X3D was quite a bit higher than it. It's about 20% higher, but I think a lot of folks with a more mid-range GPU would love something like the 5500 X3D and would be willing to spend like, $150 to $200 if it meant that they could then access DDR4 RAM at a much cheaper price and still be able to run a relatively high-end GPU. But if we ignore what AMD might do and you just take a look at, well, okay, what AM4 CPUs are out there right now, the big challenge is that all these system integrators who build pre-builts, they're way ahead of you all. They are way ahead of us PC enthusiasts. They've been buying up these CPUs en masse since the great RAM apocalypse started back in October, really. And that's when all these CPUs, both AM4, but also LGA 1700, Intel DDR4 CPUs just completely got liquidated off the market. I'm like, where did they all go? System integrators are buying them for their cheaper pre-builds, basically, but you can find a couple of them left. So there's like the Ryzen 5500 for like $80. You could pair this with a 9060 XT 16GB and have a great 1440p gaming PC with like a $100 kit of 16GB RAM. So I just don't want to sell this one too short. It's not a high performance CPU. I wouldn't pair a 9070 XT with it, for instance. And then if we look at, I'm over here at Newegg on the AM4 side, you can see most of the AM4 CPUs that are worth anything are gone. You don't want any of these Ryzen 4500. These are just really crappy CPUs, almost no cache on them. There's the 5500 we just talked about. The 5800 XT is $220. It looks like you get a wireless mouse with it. They're throwing a lot of goodies at you to try and get you to buy stuff. We'll talk about RAM deals in just a second. Do you even need to do any of this stuff? I was able to find a third-party seller on Newegg for Ryzen 5600. I'll link this down in the video description if you want to buy it. This is actually a good price, and despite the fact that it looks like it's just a tray CPU, that means it just comes in the clamshell. This is actually the box, and you actually get the Ray Stealth cooler with it as well. You know, not the best cooler in the world, but perfectly adequate for the 5600. And then if we look at the Intel CPU situation, it's kind of the same thing. You can buy some crummy i3s, a Pentium. I mean, who even wants that? Or it's like $170 for the 12600K off, which, you know, in October Prime Day was selling for like $112. And it feels bad to be paying that. And then of course you got to get a cooler with it as well. And then everything just kind of goes up from there. And I just want to revisit the Newegg RAM combos. Also, Micro Center has these as well. And if you're not in the US, check your local major PC parts retailers and see if they're bundling these things like UK overclockers, Canada Computers, and other places like that as well. But check this out. You can get a DDR4 motherboard combo, 16 gigs, $159. That's not terrible. It's not the best right now. The ones that are really, really good are actually the 16 gigabyte DDR5 combos and the 32 gigabyte DDR5 combos. For 16 gigabyte, I found this one, for instance, $239. Like, Jason, okay, what do I get for that? That motherboard's not worth $199. So it's a $160 motherboard basically. But you take $160 away from that, and what is that, 80 bucks for the RAM kit? That's not bad. Now, yes, it's a 16 gigabyte RAM kit, but so what? 16 gigabytes will be plenty enough for gaming, especially if you put a Ryzen 7500F on it and spent like $160 or $170 for the CPU, or a Ryzen 9600X, you're going to get a similar package to what you would get with that 5800 X3D. So I do kind of question whether or not it's actually necessary that we do this, because if you look at RAM prices, they're not good. I don't want to pretend that they're good, but at the same time, they're not horrific if you can access stuff like this. If you can't, I really feel your pain out there. But they even have like DDR4 32 gigabyte combos that you can pick up for, you know, not great pricing, but honestly not terrible pricing if you need a PC or you want to build a gaming PC right now. All right, Kromakuro, I hope I said that right. Now that NVIDIA has released DLSS 4.5, is it likely that AMD is going to produce something of similar caliber, or is it not likely due to architecture constraints? Well, I don't think there's any architecture constraints. The big challenge with the older generation of AMD GPUs is they don't have the same hardware on them, basically. NVIDIA calls them tensor cores, AMD calls them something different. But the Radeon RX 7000 series have some capability to do this, as do the 6000 series, but the 9000 series are a lot better at them. That's why FSR 4 works well on the 9000 series, and then they have to go to a different model to basically port it over to like the 7000 and potentially the 6000 series, and they haven't done that yet, and I really hope that they will, because honestly, let's talk about DLSS 4.5. Is it actually better than DLSS 4? It doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like. Now, here's the thing. It's early. There could be big improvements with DLSS 4 that make the performance jump ahead. But at least right now, at the time of filming, unless you have a 50 series GPU, it's kind of a step backwards for a lot of GPUs. You don't get that much visual fidelity increase, and you lose a lot of FPS. And then you're like, well, why am I upscaling to begin with if upscaling is supposed to increase my FPS, except when I use the upscaler on 4.5, I have less FPS than if I rendered natively. It's like you just start to like really lose the plot, basically. What am I even doing? And it's not clear to me that 4.5 is that much better in terms of image quality. People are going to say, oh, it's amazing. They're going to look at it with, you know, essentially this kind of zoomed in 300% frame by frame analysis. Like, show me a side by side of somebody playing a game, DLSS 4 and DLSS 4.5, right? You probably are not really going to be able to make any differences out in real time. Maybe something will catch your eye for a brief glimpse, but DLSS 4 is an extremely good technology. The question is, how much better can it possibly get, right? Once you get to 95%, what is that last 5% really worth to you? Is it worth losing all your FPS that you got to upscale in the first place? I don't really think AMD necessarily needs anything like DLSS 4.5. FSR 4 is really, really good. It's really, really good. The only difference I could see is potentially people are going to say, well, DLSS 4.5, now you can use performance mode. gives you equal, this is what NVIDIA's whole sell on is, and that'll increase your FPS. We'll see about that. I'm not so sure about that. So right now, in terms of the upscalers, I don't feel like DLSS 4.5 is a big jump forward. I kind of feel like they overemphasized DLSS 4.5 because there was no super series coming out. So they're like, oh no, what do we have? We've got, everybody expected like, 5070 Super, 5070 Ti Super, 5080 Super. Heck, we may not even have a 5070 Ti anymore. You may not even be able to really get a 50 series GPU. And then who is DLSS 4.5 for if you can't even buy a 50 series GPU? So I don't think that AMD needs to copy NVIDIA on this. In fact, I would hope that they're spending their resources trying to backport FSR 4 to their older GPUs rather than trying to come up like 3% more and lose all that FPS that you get from upscaling. Riff Jonesy wants to know, can I discuss one monitor versus 3 in gaming? So basically multiple monitors. Surround vision. So we're looking for like probably one center, 2 on the side. You see this a lot in iRacing setups and other kind of sim setups, but a lot of people just love this kind of battle station setup. 4K versus or 2K versus 3 1080p monitors. What kind of GPU do you need for that? That's a tough one. You'd have to test, and then it would probably heavily depend on what you're doing with those monitors. So think about this. If you just want to run want to run a sim racing setup like that, or they want to run like that sim trucker or some kind of simulation setup where all 3 screens are displaying something, that's going to be very hard on your GPU. It depends on the games you're playing. If those are relatively lightweight games, maybe it's not going to be that hard. But think about it this way. If you're gaming on one monitor and then you've got like maybe Discord on another and maybe your desktop or something on another, that's a totally different setup. And I want you to think about that for a second, especially if you have integrated graphics on your CPU. You can actually run one or more of those monitors if they're just doing more like desktop productivity kind of stuff or Discord. You could run that off the integrated GPU if you have like a Ryzen 7600X. You don't have to run that off of your main GPU, you just plug that into something else. Now, if you also want to then be able to use, all 3 monitors to game, yeah, you probably will need to plug it into all your GPU. And I would use DisplayPort for this. In terms of how powerful a GPU you would need at 4K, again, it heavily depends on the games that you're playing. If we're playing lighter weight titles, you could probably get away with something like a 4070 Ti Super or 5070 Ti LOL, if you can get one of those right now, or 9070 XT. But again, it's going to depend heavily on the games that you play. And again, think about using your iGPU on your CPU, if you have one, to run at least one of those monitors. All right, Mark wants to know, how many cats is too many? That is a trick question mark. Everybody knows there is no such thing as too many cats. That question doesn't even make any sense. We have 3 cats here. For those who don't know, Mr. Bear, aka, Ambrosius, aka Mr. Bear, is our main cat. We've had him since 2015, basically. I think he's like 13 years old. He's just about to turn maybe 14. And he actually owns the channel. He runs the channel. I'm his employee. He basically manages me doing everything. And then we've got Waffles and Lisa, which are recent adoptees. And that's because our cat Xena, who was Ambrosius's frenemy, she passed away, unfortunately, shortly after we moved to New Orleans. So we went out and got Waffles and Lisa. And when we adopted them, they were these tiny little kittens. And now they're these giant cats. So you'll see them. Lisa is taken to sitting on top. Mr. Bear sits right in front of me. And of course, Waffles actually has at the window over here, which we often close just for light purposes, he's got a little window ledge that he likes to sit in. And typically all 3 of the cats are here all the time I'm filming. If you got value out of this video, please give it a like. It makes a huge difference to the channel. And of course, subscribe for more cool PC content. Like, did you check out our best gaming monitor 2026 guide? We go through every gaming monitor category and pick out the best ones. We saw some really cool ones at CES 2026, by the way. Check it out, and we'll catch you on the next one.